Colorado VR Meetup Group team. The other is Mark Manis, who will talk here in a second. We're going to talk about two different things. Mark's going to talk more about how do you actually get started building things in VR. And I'm going to talk about more of a design aspect, right? So if you're building VR things, here's a thing to think about. So how many people in here have actually experienced VR? That's good. We're seeing a lot more hands go up these days. How many are interested in building things in VR? Okay, awesome. So what I want to talk about is playing with scale in VR. And so what I'm talking about here is the scale of the, excuse me here, let's see if we get through there. Scale of a world and the objects inside that world, right? So you can start with something very small, right? So here's an example of, being inside looking at a neuron firing in a brain, right? And then you can actually go all the way to playing with objects in the universe, right? And you can do all this in your headset. Scale's been used as a tool in photography, in games, in movies, right? Think Ant-Man as a recent example of a movie where you shrink a person down to the size of an ant, right? In VR, this is just ramped up big time, right? Because the difference is you're not just watching, right? You're actually experiencing it. It's your world, and so your brain is tricked, right? And so everything that you see, you take internally in a very different way than if you're just looking at a screen. So I'm going to go through some examples here that are mostly game-oriented, but we'll get to one at the end which is applicable to data visualization. Just my background, so I first got introduced to VR back in the 90s. Early 90s, I was a grad student working in theoretical physics, working on quantum gravity, so it's kind of big scale, small scale together, and I was trying to use VR to actually look at visualizing and being inside some of these kind of bizarre mathematical spaces that I was working with. Technology wasn't quite there then. Fast forward to today, things are very different, right? So I just got involved again about 2 years ago and have been just having a blast. And so one of the things that I did here was something I worked on. It's just puzzle games, right? So I wanted, as a proof of concept, to do some things. And this is basically taking blocks, building cubes or different shapes out of them. And one of the things that I noticed when I was doing this was when I started playing with the scale of the objects, I found that there was a certain scale that really made it fun. And I had other people test it. And it was kind of like a slightly abnormal, bigger scale. And it seemed to increase the presence that you had in this game. So much that there are so many times when I'm working on this and testing it that I would actually take those controllers and I would set them on my virtual table to go back to my computer. Of course, there's no table there, and onto the floor they go. But it's like a good test when you're developing, if you're fooled like that. So we'll run through some examples here. This next example is how someone's using scale to amplify emotions. And this is The Secret Shop by Valve. And what it is, you're placed inside this mysterious room. You've got these strange creatures and objects, and you can interact a little bit. And then you notice these spots that you can touch with a little light. All of a sudden, you're shrunk down, and you're in that location, right? And so there's something, when you're looking at the frog sitting on a shelf in its normal scale, no big deal. But the first time you actually go and you're on that and you turn around and you see this thing that's your size, it's pretty startling, right? And like I said, it's really used to intensify the fear and anxiety of the user, right? So the next example I'm going to go through is also playing on emotions. I saw a roundtable discussion, and the CTO of this company that built this next game called Final Approach was talking about how they started out and one of their key design objectives was to play with scale. They wanted to use scale in some interesting ways. And so this was because that they could change how people are interacting and connecting to the characters in their game. So the game they started out, and the first thing that they wanted was to convey a sense of when you're a kid playing with your toys, right? So they start you out in God mode, right? And so you're essentially an air traffic controller, right? You're guiding planes in to land, and you're telling planes when to take off. But then you have these incidents, right? So you have a plane that's on fire, right? And so you got to bring it down. And when you bring it down, then you notice a blue spot light up. You touch that blue spot, all of a sudden, you're transported into the world, right? And so you're now dealing with these incidents at the scale of the characters in the game, right? And part of that is to try to draw you in, make you more connected to the characters that are in this game. Now the next one is less about emotion and more about things that you can do to actually play with scale. How do you actually manipulate scale? And this is something called Sculpt VR by an indie developer named Nathan Rowe. And it's essentially you're using your hands to sculpt objects. And it's kind of, you know, a crude Minecraft aesthetic, so blocky shapes and all. But you can build objects. And what's cool is that he's integrated the ability to scale on a continuous basis with VR teleporting. So in VR teleporting, you're pointing at a spot, click, and you go there. When you integrate it with the scale, it's actually really cool. And so what I've done here is just, you know, written some words, sculpted them out, just to show you the range of scale that you can do in this game. What's exciting to me is that this is the stuff that's being invented right now, right? There was no need to do this before. Now there's need. And so people are looking at this stuff, right? And these tools like this are going to be used in VR editors. Right now when you build in a 3D program, right? So you're building in like Maya, 3D Max, put it into your VR, check it out, go back, you know, so people are working on editors where you can build worlds and objects completely in your headset. Now this next one is where we get into something that I think you'll start seeing ties into data analysis. I like this one just because it's cool and also kind of goes to my physics background. And this is called Universe Sandbox by Giant Army. And what these guys do is they let you take objects, build your own universe, and then run the physics, the actual physics of that universe, and you see how things play out. So here's an example of two galaxies colliding. Now, what's really cool about what they did is that they do scale transforms by using your controllers, and you're just sliding out, sliding in. So it's exactly like you might do a photo on your phone to zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, right? And I mean, so now this is blown up. I'm walking around inside two galaxies colliding, you know, and this looks huge to me, you know, and then you can scale it down. And so now if you were to think of these things, so each star potentially has a data point, right, in some big data set that you have to analyze, right? You can actually use tools like this immersion layer to get in, explore these things. Because sometimes it actually takes the right scale to find the patterns that are of interest in complex data sets. I was going to end with a really cool story involved climbing, drinking beer, and scale. But in the interest of time, I'm going to pass it over to my friend here. And if you guys want to ask me about it, I'm in the VR1 room, and I'm doing the Oculus demos. And Mark's got the HTC Vive set up. We've also got a HoloLens in there. So, and then likewise with questions, after Mark is done, you guys can ask either of us any questions. Thank you.